good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining. I think evening's a safe bet. We have maybe somebody joining from Europe. If they are, they're up at odd hours, but maybe not evening, maybe the West Coast crowd. It's late afternoon. Uh, we'll just wait a moment, let folks trickle in. But again, thank you for taking some time with us this Thursday, September 25th.
Friday's Eve.
Yeah.
I'll give it 1 minute here and then we will get started.
Sounds good.
Shall we?
Let's do it.
All right.
Folks, just again, coming in from northern New Jersey, a kind of wet day here. We had been a nice run where it seemed the events were gorgeous days, so we were, fighting for attendance now. Again, don't have an excuse. We appreciate everyone committing to probably about 45 minutes with us tonight. We moved the time just because this is really catering to our younger audience, or hopefully prospective clients, where they're spending time this time of year and focusing on their annual enrollment. We will be done well in advance of the Thursday night kickoff, and we welcome any further follow-up from clients on a one-off basis, or those of you attending the webinar. A couple quick things here again about Breakwater before I turn over to Maddie, who's going to be our kind of host for the evening. Again, firm's been a little over 2.5 years in existence. We're really happy to have the opportunity to serve our clients across a range of different professions, objectives. Again, when I think about what we do day in and day out, we like to think ourselves as partners, and what better place to do that than really be helping in the annual enrollment time. We fortunately have 3 people here tonight to lead us through the webinar. I'm going to have Maddie go ahead and kick us off with the agenda.
Yeah, this is an important conversation that we were having, as Jeff said, one-off, and we know that this is a busy time with kids getting back to school and last-minute trips being planned. So we wanted to make sure to give all of our clients and future clients, hopefully, access to information that we walk through with everyone. So I will go ahead and share my screen here. So we like to refer to this, and we've sent out a few pieces about potential employer benefits and making sure that we're taking advantage of everything that our employer has to offer us. So if we look at the agenda here tonight, we're going to be first starting off with more health, wellness, literally and figuratively, so to speak. So first, we'll start out with those medical savings accounts, and then we'll move into 401ks and retirement plans, things that we think about there, along with insurance. And then finally, we will end the presentation talking about employee stock compensation plans and making sure to cover any one-off items like elder care and other benefits, legal benefits that employers were starting to see add to their plans. And of course, we want to think about how that fits into your overall financial plan now and into the future, and maximizing all of those perks that your employer may offer. First, we'll start out with talking about those medical savings account. Tom, I will kick it off over to you to begin us with the HSAs.
Thanks, Maddie. I appreciate it. And welcome everybody. And I'm excited to talk about HSAs. And I'd first like to just say, great care should be taken anytime you're selecting a healthcare plan. For many reasons, HMO, PPO, POS plan might actually be the right choice for you. We're really looking at this through the lens of financial planning and what a great asset a health savings account can be. But I would say that about not only the HSA, but many of the benefits we're covering. It's very personalized, and there's a lot of value in having a one-on-one conversation about this, just to make sure that you're maximizing your benefits. And none of this should be taken as a blanket recommendation to sign up for one thing or another. With regard to health savings accounts, they really are coupled with a high deductible plan. And when you think about just how they work, they're essentially a brokerage account where pre-tax contributions can be put in by the employee. As you look, I already have the 2025 numbers up there, $4,300 for a Self-only, a single employee with no other dependents, 8550 for family coverage. And if you're over 55 years old, you could do an extra 1,000 as a contribution. Employers can make a $2,100 contribution on top of that. So when you think of really what's the idea, pre-tax, the money's going in, the money grows tax-free, and it's also tax-free when you distribute the funds, as long as you're using it for a qualified expense. And that's a big caveat. And I would say, as you think about if you don't use it for a qualified expense, which is often a question that we would get, or you're using it before the age of 65, you could pay up to a 20% penalty and any applicable income tax associated with the distribution. So you want to make sure that you have in your mind, if I'm going to use an HSA, it's going to be for medical expenses. It's really that triple tax-free contribution, growth, and distribution. And really, as you think about it as a financial tool, is you could potentially be lowering your taxes now by making a high contribution. You're paying for your expenses, your health expenses out of pocket. You're leaving the money in there year after year after year to grow and compound over time. And you can invest just like a brokerage account, which is, I think, fantastic. You can choose your investments typically. And really the idea is that, again, you're growing that money for some future expense. And the amount of money that we all will spend in retirement on healthcare, it's north of $250,000. So, the amount that you can and should save toward that goal specifically is huge, and the HSA is a really good way to do that.
I want to add 2 quick points to that too, Tom. So really good stuff. We do see it all the time where people, hey, yeah, I've got the HSA, I'm putting money in and I'm taking it right out, right? Again, you can do that for sure. We don't want to tell people like, leave this money here and put charges on credit cards and end up with a impaired financial situation down the line. But again, that power is over time. But really what's cool about the HSA is you could have a medical expense in 2025, but you can actually decide, hey, I don't need the money here. I'm covering it from an out-of-pocket source. I'm going to take the money out in 2035. So as long as you have the receipts or the bills to support the fact that, hey, you had a medical expense, it doesn't have to be used or withdrawn in the year that the actual event occurred. So again, just a quick point there with respect to the HSA. And again, one other quick thing that I want to highlight too, if you go to the doctor once or twice a year, checkup stuff, the savings you'll see on the high deductible plan, which means, again, you have a smaller premium every month. That's a pretty nice benefit in its own right. Again, most people don't quantify that, but I think that's an important point. So Tom, thanks for taking us through the HSA. I think, Maddie, we're going to flip to you next.
Maddie, on mute.
Yep, next is classic mistake. Next, we're going to talk about the flexible spending account, which is often paired with a non-deductible, high deductible plan. And so a lot of employers are offering flexible spending accounts. It's a tax advantaged account used to pay for qualified medical, dental, and vision expenses. Just like the HSA account, the FSA also has a contribution limit that does go up every year with inflation. So for 2024, this year's limit is $3,200 per individual. And so different from an HSA, the FSA account is, just like it looks, per individual. And so if you have a higher premium health plan, you and your partner can both have different FSA accounts, and you can each contribute the $3,200 per individual account, but you can't do the $6,400 into one account. And so there's a lot of if that, then this rules with the FSAs, but just something to keep in mind. And the tax benefits of an FSA are that contributions are pre-tax, so lowering your taxable income, always something, that we're looking at with clients as they plan into the future. And some examples of eligible expenses are co-pays, deductible prescription medications, medical supplies, some vision care, glasses, contact lenses, dental care, cleanings, fillings, and any over the counter medication feminine hygiene products. So there's a lot of things that fall into eligible expenses. And what's really nice is typically the website that your FSA is a part of will have a list of eligible expenses, and retailers like Target has, will start to tag things that are FSA eligible, especially near the end of the year. And Amazon also has FSA eligible tags. So companies and retailers are being a lot more transparent with what is eligible and what's not. And what's not is, unfortunately, we can't pay our Botox bills from our FSA account. So those are ineligible expenses. Non-prescription vitamins and any other sort of non-essential medical services, if you will, are not eligible to be used by the FSA. Something that's vastly different on the FSA versus the HSA is this is a use it or lose it account. And so funds that go into this plan have to be spent. Otherwise, if any funds that are left over, those are typically forfeited. And so it's really important. There's a lot of planning that goes into this account. It's really important that you have some foresight on, if you're going to have a higher cost medical year for whatever the reason may be, is that you're using those funds before they are forfeited. And, you really want to keep track of reimbursements. And because those funds are forfeited at the end of the year, you really want to stay on top of submitting your claims for those eligible expenses to get reimbursed. And with some employers do offer rollovers of any unused funds, and that limit does go up every year a bit with inflation. For this year, it's $610 that you can move over to the next year if your plan allows for it. You definitely want to confirm with your employer. If you find that you are hitting, that $610 threshold, or that you are having a significant balance at the end of the year, you may want to rethink about what type of ultimately, medical insurance plan you're choosing, because the HSA, may be more beneficial for you at that point. But nonetheless, we always want to make sure that we're maximizing whatever medical savings account that we have. So we always want to look at your plan contributions. So estimating what your annual medical expenses may be to avoid over contributing. We always want to make sure to be using those benefits wisely. So, if you're getting towards the end of the year and you see that balance is still built up there, and you don't have anything right in front of you that that you're going to spend it on, making sure to actually schedule those medical visits and purchasing items before the end of the year. And it's always, you have to be really cognizant of tracking and submitting claims. So make sure that you stay organized with your receipts, that you submit claims promptly to make sure that you're getting reimbursed. So again, we can't emphasize this enough, that you don't forfeit any dollars by not using them. And along the same sort of vertical there, a lot of employers are offering dependent care flexible savings accounts. So similar to the medical FSA, but a little bit different. This is a tax advantaged account used to pay for eligible dependent care expenses. So think daycare, preschool, after school care, any, sort of nanny care that you may be paying for. If anyone is paying for this type, paying less than $5,000, I would love to know what your secret is. The average dependent care in the US ranges anywhere from $30,000 a year per child to $50,000. So it's a very high number. We want to make sure to be paying it for in the most tax advantaged way as possible. And so this is one way of doing that. Unlike the medical FSA, you cannot have two dependent care accounts. So if two people work for two different corporations and they both offer them, you can only have one account. It's a $5,000 limit per household, $2,500 if you're married filing separately. So again, you want to be cognizant of those contribution limits as a household. And the tax benefits of this account is that your contributions are pre-tax, so it does reduce your taxable income. And again, as childcare is extremely expensive, this is definitely a tax efficient way of paying at least that first $5,000 in expenses. You do have to have qualifying dependents for this type of account. So your children need to be under the age of 13, If they are not, your spouse or dependent, whoever you're using these costs on, must be unable to care for themselves. And some examples of eligible expenses are daycare, preschool, before and after school programs, some summer camps, and in-home care. And again, just like with the medical FSAs, you really want to be cognizant. This also has that use it or lose it feature. So you have to use these funds within the plan year or grace period, or those funds are forfeited. What's really nice about these plans is that you submit your claims online to be reimbursed. And so typically they're taken out per pay period. And so, you're funding the $5,000 over the year, but you can submit your reimbursements. You can stack them, right? So if you know that you're going to spend more than 5,000, just submit everything over 2-3 month period, so that as soon as that money gets deposited into the FSA, you're automatically getting reimbursed, and then you can kind of forget about it for the rest of the year. So again, just making sure you're submitting those claims for eligible expenses to get reimbursed. Any non-covered expenses tend to be like private school tuition, any long-term care are typically excluded from covered expenses. So again, with this account, you really want to make sure that you're planning ahead, estimating your annual expenses, making sure that you're contributing the right amount. If your child is going back, or if your child is going to kindergarten or first grade, but you are going to have to fund after school programs for whatever reason, just make sure that if it's not going to exceed $5,000 a year, that you are planning ahead and that you're only contributing the right amount there. And one thing that we do with our clients is we'll combine this type of planning with the child and dependent care credit, just to make sure that we're getting maximum tax savings when it comes to taking dependent tax credits. And as always, same thing with the medical FSA. You want to make sure to stay organized with your receipts and submit timely claims so that you're getting reimbursed in a timely manner. Next, something that we talk about often ad nauseum with clients is retirement. 401ks, matching investing go hand in hand with that. Want to do this early and often. But what we don't necessarily always get into is the employer part of that, which is the matching and vesting. And so within the 401k, we talk about matching, which is your employer match contribution. And so when you're looking through your benefits package, you're going to see language like 50% match up to 6% of your salary. That's the kind of language that would indicate to you that there is a match on your 401k plan, 403b plan, whatever your employer ultimately offers you. There are limits to the match, just like every 401k plans has its contribution limits. There are employer limits. 2024, those limits are 23,000, 30,500 if you are 50 and up. And obviously, this is something that we always emphasize: is maximizing these benefits is definitely one tool in your back pocket to long-term retirement savings. We never want to walk away from free money. So at the very least, we want to make sure that we're maxing at a minimum enough to get we're contributing enough to get the employer match. And so one thing that goes along that's not really as talked about when it comes to 401k contributions is vesting schedules. Some companies have different vesting schedules. And what that means is vesting is the period that you need to work at your employer, to the period of time, rather, that you need to work at your employer to retain full ownership of your employer contributions. Your employee contributions are always yours, and if you leave the company, you will leave with those. But this is specifically referencing your employer contributions. And there's two types of vesting schedules typically. One of them is cliff vesting. And so that is referring to being 100% vested after a specific number of years. Typically, that number of years is between 3 and 7 years. But there's also another type of vesting called a grading vesting schedule. And that is a gradual vesting over a period of time. So just for easy numbers, Sometimes what you'll see is that you're vested 20% a year over a 5-year period. And so the impact of those vesting schedules is that leaving a company early may affect your access to those employer contributions. And sometimes what you'll see is it's not just the employer contributions that have a vesting schedule, but if your employer offers any profit sharing, that profit sharing also may be on a vesting schedule. So it's really important that you understand and that you know those vesting schedules, because if you're at year 4 and you're 80% vested, or you're 1 year away from that cliff vesting to get 100%, you really have to think about, can I stick it out for 1 more year because I don't want to walk away from, X amount of dollars, whatever the case may be is. And to maximize these benefits, again, something that we can't emphasize enough to everyone that we speak to is you at least want to contribute enough to get the full employer match. You really want to make sure that you understand your vesting schedule to make really important and informed career decisions. And you want to make sure to review these plans annually to make sure that they're always aligning with your retirement goals, because those are going to shift and change over time. And you want to make sure that that's reflected in whatever large retirement vehicle that you are saving in.
I'm going to give Maddie a minute to catch her breath because she's the next slide too, folks. So in the context of the 401k, again, the nice thing here is this isn't necessarily something we got to figure out in this 2-week window we have in the fourth quarter. Fortunately, you can make adjustments to your 401k throughout the year. It should be an opportunity for us to not just think about 2025, but hey, we still got 3 months plus in 2024. Are we on track to hit our goals, or are we on track to max out? We didn't hit on the slide here, just in the spirit of keeping the time efficient. Post-tax or non-deductible contributions or Roth contributions, those can make a lot of sense as well. So again, kind of in a one-off situation, let's have that conversation. But the total limits to contribute to a 401k between an employee and employer are $69,000 for 2024. I know that for some people that might be more than we're making. So hey, we're not trying to aspire to things that are unreasonable. But if we really have a thoughtful, kind of heart-to-heart look in the mirror moment, and we can afford to do more, let's talk about it. Because again, I think the 401k is probably one of the most powerful tools out there. Maddie, back to you. You've got your water, you've got your oxygen. Let's hear from you about the deferred comp.
So in tandem with the 401k is deferred compensation. And so that's a portion of your income to set aside to be paid at a later date, typically at retirement, separation of service, meaning that you're leaving that employer, or some employers offer an in-service distribution. And so again, it takes some planning there on when you're going to receive that compensation and what date you're going to receive that compensation at. And there are really 2 different types of deferred comp. One is non-qualified deferred compensation plans. And those, take a little bit more planning than some of the 457B plans. Those are also referred to as deferred compensation plans. Those relatively will mirror 401k or 403B plans. And so those are not as flexible as the non-qualified deferred compensation plans. But again, those are more one-off situations. We're more than happy to facilitate those discussions for government and non-government employees, depending on what type of plan you have access to. And some of the key benefits of the deferred compensation plan, one is the tax deferral. That's something, again, if you're a highly compensated employee, this deferred comp plan can come, into play and be really useful, as contributions are pre-tax and they can help with lowering your current taxable income. So if we look at, making sure that the 401k is something that we're, contributing to first, and we're still in that highest tax bracket, what are some of the ways that we can continue to, put money in certain accounts that will shield that money from taxes? This is another way of doing that. And it helps with long-term savings. And so we can use this to supplement retirement income, but it also can be used for shorter term goals, which is different, than the 401k, which is really geared towards retirement goals. But deferred comp plans can be used for, more intermediate or shorter term goals, like buying a house. If we know that we're going to purchase a piece of real estate, over the next 5-6 years, that deferred compensation can come into place and essentially act as your down payment, sort of forcing you to save for that down payment, or whatever the case may be, is but also some things that we talk to our clients about is funding a child's education. So if we don't already have a 529 established and that, period in which they're going to go to a higher education or college is coming around the corner, this is a different tool that we can use if you have it and have flexibility in the budget, to be used for those kinds of more intermediate term goals and not just geared towards retirement. So again, this has a little bit more flexibility associated with it. And the way that this works is you set aside a portion of your salary or your bonus, or possibly a combination of the two. Typically, when you're going through your annual enrollment, your deferred comp will be very specific on what you're saving and what you're deferring. And funds can be received at retirement or other specified future dates. And typically you can elect to receive your deferred compensation plan as either a lump sum or installment distributions. And some key considerations for this deferred comp plan is one, that we always highlight, although, sometimes it's relevant, sometimes it's not, is the risk in deferred compensation is typically tied to the company's financial health, because deferred compensation is considered, that sort of plan is considered an unsecured creditor for the company. And so you really want to be cognizant of, if you're at a big Fortune 500 company and, it's, probably not going anywhere like your Microsofts, your Apples, your Alphabets of the world. But if you're at a smaller company that may be going through some restructuring or whatever the case may be, is you just want to be cognizant of those things. And the withdrawal rules for deferred compensation plans, early withdrawals may result in some penalties. You definitely want to be cognizant of that if you have more of a 457 deferred compensation plan. But typically, non-qualified plans don't necessarily follow those same early withdrawal rules like the 401k plan has. And you can access the funds at a specified date. And one thing that's interesting with deferred compensation plans is you can postpone some distributions if your plans change, but you do have to make sure that those elections are made 1 year in advance, and it defers that compensation for at least 5 years. So if you were planning on, if your child was planning on going to college in 1 year, but now they're getting a scholarship or whatever the case may be, is we can defer that compensation further. We just have to be really cognizant of when we're choosing to do that. So we want to plan ahead for deferred compensation, making sure that it fits into your overall financial plan. And we also want to make sure to coordinate that with your tax planning, something, that we do often with clients, and making sure that we're using as many vehicles as we can to optimize our tax benefits. And along with that, we will next move into our student loan repayment assistance.
Maddie, I appreciate you saying something there about paying for college, looping that into deferred comp. Makes for a smooth transition over to student loan repayment assistance, which is a subject near and dear to my heart, and really is one of the most sought after benefits by job seekers. And the reason for that really is that in the United States right now, there's $1.74 trillion of outstanding student loan debt. It's a massive number. It's a big problem. And I really look at both this and the next slide I'm gonna share as very much win-win for both employer and employee. The employers, as you can see up there, they're able to actually contribute $5,250, which is fully tax deductible, and it's not included in the employee's income, as far as a benefit for employees to pay down student loans. If you simply divide that number by 4, it's about $437 a month, which actually lines up really well. In the United States, the average monthly payment right now for student loans is actually somewhere between $400 and $450. So it lines up really well. This, along with a lot of the other topics that we've talked about, as Maddie was just talking about deferred compensation, there's strategy to it, right? Depending on your situation, you may take advantage in 1 year, you might not do it in another. With student loan repayment, a lot of it's foresight. So it's kind of going into college saying, okay, who's going to take the loans, right? Is it the parent? Is it the student? And then ultimately, if they end up working for a company that does have the student loan repayment assistance as a benefit, how aggressively are you actually paying off the loans? Because if the company's going to pay some, then the person who took the loan, the student, has the ability to either ramp up how much they're paying back, meaning they can still contribute quite a bit, the employer is contributing quite a bit, and they're paying their loans off very quickly. Or if they have competing financial goals, whether it's an emergency fund, if it's starting to build up, maxing out their 401k or contributing to a Roth, or maybe it's buying a home, or if they're already into the child rearing years, as Maddie said, the cost of daycare is astronomical. This type of program can give people a little bit of relief or breathing room within their budget, and just really making sure they have some balance as it relates to paying off the student debt, as well as those more immediate costs that they'll see. So, Maddie, if you don't mind flipping to the next slide. Elder care, child care, again, I look at it as a win-win for employee and employer. If you think about the Gen X, from time to time is referred to as the sandwich generation, where we're caring for, in some cases, elderly parents as people live longer and longer, mostly healthy lives, which is great, but also children. So these benefits really were introduced to make sure, to some degree, that the workforce was able to stay at work. So the employers could kind of keep us all at our desks to keep up the good work, but still in an affordable way and in a convenient way have the ability to pay for, again, either elderly parents or kids. Often companies are partnering with other companies to do this. So it's more like a corporate perk or a benefit where you get a discount because you work for a larger company, and it's just an economy of scale. Occasionally you will actually have a firm where there will be daycare on site, but that's, I would say, probably more rare unless you're working on a really big campus where there are thousands of employees, where they could essentially fill up a daycare on a consistent basis and have those employees paid for. So often you'll see it with national type companies like a Bright Horizons or something like that. Sometimes it can be full-time, like, hey, this is option A. Other times it can actually be a backup care. So if something falls through with your nanny or regular daycare, this is the time of year where kids are going back to school and everybody's sick with something, as they I kind of refer to my kids lovingly as like my little outbreak monkeys, because they'll go to school, they'll catch something, they'll bring it home, and we all get sick. If that happens at a daycare, then this is often a nice way to kind of act as a backstop. That's all I'll say about that. I will turn it over to Jeff now to talk some insurance.
Everyone's favorite topic, right? And again, thanks for staying with us here, folks. We'll try to zip through the insurance section, being very, again, mindful of time. Whenever you have a financial planning conversation, life insurance is going to come up, right? And just very clear, we're fiduciaries fee only. We do not sell insurance products, right? So this is not a sales pitch in any way, shape, or form. But it's important to understand life insurance. I think when I think about life, actually benefits, in my own personal experience, probably 3 times I actually really truly immersed myself in the benefits offering, right? One was when I first started my job, like, oh, this is new. Second was when I had a life event, got married, had children. And the third is if they introduce something new in the plan. And those are rare events, right? You might be in a job for 20 years. And so if there's 3 or 4 times you actually look at this more closely, that's probably pretty common. So again, I want to highlight a few things here. Life insurance, because that changed a lot in our lives, right? So 2 kind of key types of life insurance out there: term life and whole life. We're going to spend no time on whole. Whole is kind of when you die, we will. It's eventually going to happen. Term is really about the idea of protecting ourselves if you die in some period of time prematurely, right? And so the offerings through your work are considered basically annual terms, right? Like you're employed, your company will go ahead and provide that insurance, either through just their direct premium payments or some combined benefit. As long as you're there, you leave, you may or may not be able to transfer your policy. In most instances, it's not economical, but the idea is you want to take advantage of the benefits of a group program, right? So, and how you determine what's the right amount of insurance, kind of 3 important things: the wages that we would forego and the savings that go along with that, any liabilities we have today, student loans Tom just spoke about, mortgages, right? Again, It can be big numbers, especially with the average home price today, north of $400,000. In the Northeast, far more than that. And then upcoming expenses, tuition, which you talked about as well. So, I mean, it's not uncommon to see, millions of dollars of insurance for younger people, knowing all that stuff is still in front of them. But most companies only offer fairly modest amounts of coverage. $50,000, $100,000 are kind of standard face values, maybe 2x salary. Again, they want to foot the bill, but they don't necessarily want to go ahead and excuse me, they want to help a little bit, but they don't want to necessarily, accept a tremendous amount of responsibility that should be addressed at the household level. Most companies will offer some sort of augmented or enhanced benefit through the employer, right? So you can get the benefit of those group rates. You may or may not have to go through underwriting. Again, the bigger the size of the policy, that's probably going to require someone to come to a physical or do a questionnaire. But we often tell people, hey, unless you're going to be at your employer for the next 30 plus years, which is, not common these days, buying a policy in the marketplace can be actually more attractive because, again, you're going to lock in a payment that you're going to know what it's going to be for the next 20, 25, or 30 years when we think about term. So we'll leave it there in life insurance. Again, a conversation we can have in more depth, but that scratches the surface. We'll hop to the next one, which is disability insurance, right? And again, it's a common phrase that disability can be worse than death, right? And we mean by that is obviously the ongoing care of the disabled is another drain on resources at the household level. So we want to make sure that if you have an employer who has disability coverage, that's great. You want to make sure you understand it. There's two types: short term, which is usually limited window, 3 to 6 months; longer term, which is beyond the point in time which the short term stops, till is oftentimes far out to 65. But you'll notice, right, the benefits from a short term versus long term are pretty drastically different. Short term oftentimes is close to covering your full salary, whereas long term is going to be a pretty significant reduction. Why? A company doesn't want to be in a position where you never come back to work, right? Again, they're generally having an insurance company pay that, but still there's an incentive for you to return. So if 60% of your salary, right, not necessarily your total compensation, wouldn't be enough to go ahead and cover those expenses, it's best to look at, again, augmenting the disability policy either through your employer, which is less common, but it still is there, or going out to the marketplace and buying a disability policy. We see this a lot with our doctors, right? Like, again, a lot of disability policies at the employer level will cap out at $180,000, right? It's a lot of money, but if you're a specialty physician making, far in excess of that, the disability policy will not ultimately cover those costs. You might have big student loan debts. Again, the idea of you finding some other form of employment is likely to be far less than what it would be that you were earning as a doctor. So we tell people, again, try to get as much coverage as we can afford, and thoughtfully, take into account what would, make sure that the household can continue to kind of function without us. Employers who cover, the employer portion of long-term, short and long-term disability, that benefit to you is taxable. If you pay a portion of the premium or you buy a policy in the marketplace, those are non-taxable benefits. Again, that's post-tax money that's being used to pay there. So we would say to you again, the idea is focus on having that proper coverage. Taxation may or may not come into play depending on who's making that payment. Maddie, you jumped ahead, which again, keeping me on task, which is great. Let's jump to the next slide, which is our favorite, long-term care, right? Again, long-term care is a phenomenon we generally think about for folks in their 70s or 80s, but it's not totally implausible to see these things trigger earlier. You have two activities of daily living. They're kind of outlined here. If you can't do two of those things, you can trigger a long-term disability claim, right? Here, we're going to focus on more the idea of taking advantage of actually using the coverage or buying the coverage through an employer where the costs are significantly subsidized. If you go and look out in the marketplace, long-term care insurance premiums have skyrocketed over the last 10, 15 years, mainly because they were mispriced. But through employer offerings, they actually are pretty compelling. And so again, if you have the ability in your cash flow, something worth considering, right? There's a big peace of mind benefit here. Hopefully you don't end up needing it, but if you do, and more people are, as we see people living longer, this can really fill some nice gaps into your financial plan. Again, COLAs, cost of living adjustments are oftentimes important when you're enrolling in something like this, when you're 45 or 55. Benefit today, what seems big, might not be that much in 15 years. We've all heard a lot about inflation the last couple of years. And then there are elimination periods and daily limits that come into play. Again, outside the scope of what we'll cover today. But bottom line is, I think this is worth a look, especially if you're a larger employer. Obviously, most smaller employers, this is not something part of the cafeteria plan. Um, Again, kind of a quick hits on insurance. I'm going to pass it back to Maddie because this one sits close to home for her. We don't have a pet in the Hanson household for a variety of reasons, but Maddie, please take us through pet insurance.
Well, unlike Jeff's household, 66% of Americans do have a pet. So we thought that this one was a good one to introduce. And we see a lot more employers offering pet insurance. The average spend on a puppy, and I default to dogs because we do have a Labradoodle, is $30,000 in the first year. So definitely, as those veterinarian costs are going up, definitely something to consider. Again, this is a pet insurance slide, for anyone that has a husband, not referring to the husband on this one, but so as we look at different types of pet insurance, there's a lot of plans being introduced out there. You want to make sure that you get one that fits your budget and that fits, the costs associated for whatever you anticipate paying for. And so it's a health insurance policy designed specifically for your pet to cover any veterinarian costs. And the coverage types usually fall into 3 different categories. First one is going to be, typically your cheapest, which is accident only, covers emergencies, broken bones, ingestion of foreign objects. So especially, if you do have a dog, or, whenever even a kitten, they're looking to definitely eat things that they're probably not supposed to. So you want to make sure, and those ER trips are significantly more expensive than the regular veterinarian expenses. So something to think about there. Accident and illness policies covers a little bit more. So again, that covers those accidents, but again, covers the illnesses such as cancer, infections, some allergies that pets may get. And the wellness plan, which is a plan that's being introduced more and more now, covers more routine care like vaccines, flea prevention, dental cleanings, which are extremely expensive, and more vets are suggesting that you get the pet's teeth cleaned at least once a year. And so as those costs continue to go up, you're seeing more and more wellness plans being introduced. And typically, these plans work exactly how other insurance plans work. So premiums are on a monthly or annual basis. You may get a little bit of a discount if you pay on an annual on an annual payment instead of a monthly payment. And reimbursement typically works the same way that FSA accounts work. So you pay the vet upfront, and then you file a claim for reimbursement. And typically the reimbursement ranges anywhere from covering 70% to 90% of the cost, just depending on, your budget and what you want your premium to look like. And these plans also, of course, with any insurance plan, have their deductibles and their annual payout limits. So plans typically have like a $250 deductible, and then they'll have an annual limit on essentially what they'll to $15,000 to $20,000 worth of costs, and the premiums vary for there. And what's covered, not covered. So commonly covered expenses are accidents, illnesses, surgeries, hospital stays. Again, those tend to add up very, very quickly. So it's nice that some of these insurance plans are now covering that. Typically not covered is any pre-existing condition, elective procedure. Grooming, is a question that we get a lot. Twyla's, my dog's haircuts are almost as much as mine, which is pretty crazy, but those are not covered expenses, and any breeding related costs. So if you are getting your dog for a breeder, typically you have to pay for, different things. Those are not typically covered in any insurance policy, at least that, that we've seen yet. And some things that you want to consider when you are considering whether or not to get pet insurance is your pet's age and breed. And so some breeds are more prone to have problems than others. For an example, your pug type of dog typically is prone to have more breathing issues. German Shepherd prone to have hip issues. So you want to, take those into consideration. Obviously, your budget is a big one, so you have to evaluate if the premiums and potential savings make financial sense for your specific situation. And obviously, with any insurance, it does hopefully give you some peace of mind in knowing that unexpected veterinarian bills won't cause a strain in your financial plan. And so, you always want to shop around for these plans, as with any type of insurance, making sure that you're getting the most efficient coverage and pricing, understanding and knowing what this plan covers, what it doesn't cover, and preventative care. Again, a lot more of these plans are covering for wellness, which is typically falls in line with that preventative care to maintain your pet's health and avoid higher costs that may come down the road. And we'll kick it off to our final sort of section here to Jeff with the equity compensation.
Yeah, look, I think I need an equity compensation plan that cover my pet insurance or my pet costs. Kidding aside, we know how important pets are. I think unconditional love exists more with people and pets than perhaps family members. But again, to kind of round us out, we'll talk about equity compensation. There's generally three key areas: stock units, options, and stock purchase plan. We see some of our wealthiest clients who've been fortunate to work and also provide a lot of that sweat equity for these businesses to be successful. So we say, hey, if you have them, great. Make sure you take full advantage. But there's some areas to be sensitive to as well. We don't want to find ourselves at 65 years old having 90% of our net worth in our company stock. There is such a thing as too much of a good thing. Maddie, we'll hop to the next slide just to get into these things in a little more detail. The most common we're seeing today is stock units. So, you go back to date ourselves. Tom and I started our careers in the midst of the technology mania that kind of ran through the 90s into the 2000s, when stock options, which we'll talk about in a moment, were all the rage. Since then, as many of those companies imploded, stock units became a more attractive tool for both companies because it allowed them to better control costs on a going forward basis, but really for employees, they were like kind of more certainty to it. So your most traditional is the restricted stock unit. You're granted shares when you sign on with a company, or when you hit a certain level at the organization when you become eligible, and then those shares will vest over time. The shares you're granted generally tend to be the same from the point at which they're given to you. There's 100 shares today. Those 100 shares will be the ones that vest over time. When they vest, what happens, which is somewhat unique, is they'll sell a portion of the shares, they meaning the company. Sale is really there to cover your taxes, and then the net shares end up in a brokerage account. It might be at Fidelity, E-Trade, Schwab, and the big players, Morgan Stanley, who house or are sponsors or servicing employee stock plans. There's again quite a bit of appeal here, but we want to be sensitive to the idea that if it starts to be too much of your portfolio, worth a conversation about where to unpack. Performance stock units are kind of the sibling of a restricted stock unit, very similar in the point of which they're granted. You get a unit number, but what happens over time is the performance of the company in relation to some objectives can change the share count, right? So let's say at 100 shares at issuance, again, as I outlined in the example here, could be 50% more, could be 20% less. Again, can really run the gamut. So you got a little bit more potential upside associated with the stock, both the the grant date. You're hoping over time that the stock goes up. Here you can see the combination of a higher stock price and perhaps more shares. One quick thing I'll say about stock units. A lot of folks, when they have an vesting award, will end up not realizing, hey, I could turn around and sell the stock at that point in time to raise cash with a limited further tax consequence, because the tax hit primarily occurred when it vested. And so again, just know that in the back of your mind, this is money that might be accessible to you at a certain point in time. It doesn't have to be kind of put away in the lockbox. And it's up to the options. Again, I talked about this before, that they were very, very popular at one point. Again, options have a kind of much more of a leverage effect, right? So if you happen to be very early in a company and a company does really well, the wealth you create through options oftentimes is much greater than through restricted stock or performance stock units. But again, they're less common. We do see occasionally companies that offer a employee the ability to select between an RSU and an option. You usually have a multiple. So you say, hey, I can take one RSU, or I might be able to take 3 options. But the basic concept of the option is it's all about the future upside from the grant date, right? The RSU, I've got some value immediately. I just have to hang around to vest. Options, the stock has to go up over time for it to be worth anything. And so you usually see a lot more in terms of unit issuance than you'd see with an RSU or a PSU. You usually have 10 years from the point at which it's given to you till it expires. Now, if you leave your job early, you might have 90 days to exercise. It might be 5 years, so they could shorten the calendar. So it's really important, just like Maddie was talking about earlier, when you walk away from an employer and think about your vesting schedule for your company match or profit sharing, your vesting schedule for your options matters, but the expiration date can change as well. There's two elements in an option, right? There's a intrinsic value associated with the stock, right? So again, whatever the stock is doing, that's going to impact the value of your option. But there's also a time component, and that time component, the further away it is from expiration, that's more valuable. The closer you get to the point which the option is going to expire, that time value kind of decays away. Options, generally speaking, are taxed at ordinary income in the forms we see them more today, which is non-qualified. There are incentive stock options. With that, you're generally buying the stock and then holding on to it for a couple of years before you sell it. Again, outside the scope of the discussion today, we want to keep the time tight. But for those of you who do have incentive stock options, there's a lot of nuance to that. We would welcome a conversation, both from the point at which they're granted to you, but then also when it comes time to exercise. Again, I'll kind of keep it there. Let's hop on the last piece on equity comp, which is the employee stock purchase plan. Stock purchase plans are more elective, right? Whereas the equity compensation I just said before is your company's decision how we take care of our employees. The employee stock purchase plan is, hey, you want to participate? It's up to you. Usually have this with only publicly traded companies. I can say in few instances I've seen this over the years with privates, but primarily it's publicly traded companies. And you have windows, usually 1 or 2 a year, where you're saying, hey, I'm going to participate. You're going to pick a certain dollar amount or a percentage of your pay, and that'll buy the stock. What's really nice is you're usually buying the stock at either a discount from an average price over the window. Let's say, again, it's the first half of the year. So from January through June, you'll take the average price and discount that by 10 or 15%, or it might be a discount off the lowest point it hit over that last 6-month or quarterly period. So you can appreciate there's some really nice embedded profit in there. A couple things to be sensitive to is, again, you get other equity compensation, the company's paying your paycheck. You want to be, you don't want to be too overweighted to your employer, but again, this is a decent program if you can afford to tuck it in. There's some concerns or considerations about quick flips. Quick flip is, hey, I bought the stock today, I got the 15% discount. What's to prevent me from just turning around and quickly selling the stock? There are a couple things. One is you can have a situation where the discount is recognized as income, so the discount kind of goes away in that sense. Two would be if you're an executive, or an insider, you could have disgorgement, which means, again, you had a profit, but because the profit was realized in such a short span of time, and you by definition generally have access to information that the firm doesn't want publicly available, you might have to forfeit that. And again, depending on how you're frequently selling fairly quickly after these things become vested or acquired, they can actually penalize you from using the plan altogether. Some people are told they can't use it for a year or two. Sometimes they're permanently disallowed from participating in this employee stock plan. But again, something to keep in mind, right? If you're putting money in your 401k plan, your deferred comp, your employee stock plan, hey, we got to have some money come home to pay the mortgage or the rent. But again, a pretty good tool. Let's hit on the last slide here, and then I have a couple quick points, and then Maddie, I'll let you take us home. Estate planning legal services, companies like MetLaw and some others are now being offered through, again, typically more larger employers. They will provide discounted legal services for things like creating a will, prenups and postnups, could help with even things like closing on real estate. Again, if you go out in the area we are, it's not uncommon to see attorneys with fees of $500,000, $700,000 an hour, depending on the scope of the work they're doing. So here you're going to see oftentimes significant discounts for quality work. In really sophisticated, complex cases, this might not be the best avenue, but for younger people, the type of work that they do is right up your alley, right? And you're going to get a little bit more help probably than you would through a LegalZoom or some of their software companies that are out there. So that kind of rounds out the subject matter. There are other things: adoption assistance, gym memberships, IVF support. So we don't want to minimize that. If you're fortunate enough to have those things at your company, spectacular. I learned something new today at my before the actual audience joined. Maddie took a shot at my receding hairline. The use of my FSA for hair plugs, unfortunately, won't work. That's a cosmetic expense. But again, if we can help you maximize your benefits, you're going to be in a really good place. And again, we'll spend the time because we think it's in your best interest and wellness. So Maddie, if you have some closing thoughts, or Tom, if there's anything in the Q&A, please, you can take us home.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of different options here, and it's sort of hard to sort of envision how all of these things work together on your behalf. And that's work that we enjoy doing with our clients, and we like to take that off of your plate and make sure that you're rounding out all these benefits in a way that benefits you. And so make sure that if you have those questions, or if you're looking at your plan and you're sitting there thinking, what would benefit me, and, how will this help me in the future, whether that's the future is 5 years away, or, retirement 30 plus years away, make sure to come to us, because we love answering those questions. That's the value that we add to clients. So we're more than happy to take those discussions on a per client basis and offline. Tom, anything to add here before we turn it off?
No, I think everybody took the hint that it's a very personalized thing, and they'll meet with us one-on-one.
Great. Well, thank you all so much, and we'll get this out in a recording as well for those who weren't able to join. Thanks again.
Thank you.